The views expressed in this interview are those of the individuals and do not reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. Government, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy, or the Naval Postgraduate School. Welcome to the Trident Room, brewer of stout conversation, unfiltered and on tap.
On today's episode, Trident Room host Luke Goorsky sits down and gets to know NPS student and fellow podcast host Marcus Antonellis.
So you went from being a firefighter, and now you're here, and you're in the space systems operations program.
So quite a roller coaster. It's funny. I don't know how much this will go to my credit, but the way NPS slates are managed for SWOs is it's part of the talent management board now, and they sent out all the options of things you could apply for at NPS, and I was going through them, and I would have been comfortable taking any of them. They were all very interesting and stuff I would be super happy with. But then I saw the space systems majors on there. I was like, oh man, I could go learn about space. That sounds really cool. So I put that on there. I didn't think a whole lot of it. I'm like, I got a degree in math, but I wasn't the best college student. I didn't have the best GPA. I assumed I figured some Polytechnic Institute kid would get that spot who had a 4.0. But then a few weeks later, I walk in, I get called up to CO's cabin. He's like, you're going NPS to study space. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, you got the space systems operations spot. And I was like, oh man, that's really cool.
And so when you say the space systems, is there only one for the entire
sorry.
subcommittee?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, sorry. So there are, in my class now, there is one other, so with my cohort, there's one other SWO. Yeah, one. So not a whole lot. And it only starts once a year. So if you look at it, they take 2 SWOs a year. So I'm pretty. I remember calling because this was also during the COVID restrictions would start setting in around this time as well, and I called. And it was Professor Tackett answered the phone, and I started asking him like, "Hey, I gotta fill out this waiver to be able to come to NPS." And I was saying, "Is there any more information you can give me on the program?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, what community are you from?" I was like, "Oh, I'm a SWO." He's like, "Oh wow, we don't get a whole lot of those here. You should say that. They'll definitely let you come." I was like, "Okay, sure." So I did, and it worked out great. So Professor Tackett had great advice, as he usually does. So I guess long story short, I applied for the Space Systems Operations program because I thought it sounded cool, and I ended up here. And
is it cool?
And spoiler, it's really cool. Yeah, it's all over the place. Like I was saying earlier, like electromagnetism, satellite communications, plasma, sunspots, lunar eclipses, orbital mechanics, like quote unquote rocket science, just incredibly cool. Never in a million years would I have thought I would be able to still be a naval officer, but also learn about space to the level that I'm learning it to. It's really awesome, and I'm honestly thankful for it every single day. And I think going back to the whole teaching thing, I think a lot of the things that I'm learning now in this program is going to be tremendously applicable when I go back to the fleet as a department head. We see a lot of threats now coming from our adversaries. These hypersonic glide vehicles, space operations. And just an environment where objects move on the order of not miles per hour anymore; it's kilometers per second, and it is mind-bendingly fast. Like nothing we've been able to track or do anything with before conventionally, and that is still very much new to SWOs like myself. And my goal when I go back to my ship is to take these tidbits, because obviously I don't want to sit down day one and be like, all right, orbital mechanics, all right, this is the Earth, this is how it's I don't want to do that, but I really want to distill what I'm learning here with the hypersonics, the exoatmospherics, the satellite communications, how that stuff impacts surface warfare, and be able to distill that down and bring that to my next ship. And all the stuff I'm learning here has been nothing but amazing and has set me up to do that just very, very well. So I'm really looking forward to that because I think, as you can tell, I really like to nerd out about things I'm relatively, passionate about. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, so let's go back to draw a similarity to your time back as the DCA back on the John Paul Jones. Now you're Lieutenant Commander Antonellis, and you're walking around the mess decks again. And Seaman Timmy comes back. He saw that really cool Jaws of Life demonstration you did before, and he says, "Sir, what's the most interesting thing you can tell me about what you learned at MPS being a space systems major?"
Oh, man. So I hate to sound like sort of rehash on what I already touched on, but I think what really blows my mind about the things in space is just the speeds at which things move up there. It is, and I think a lot of conventional warfare officers still have a kind of difficult time fathoming. I mean, pilots might not, but at least on the SWO side, things moving, like orbiting the Earth once every 90 minutes, like that's unheard. Like that's unheard of. Solar winds moving at 450, 500 kilometers a second. Yeah, just the magnitude of which things move and the interconnectedness of everything, and how we as humans have gotten it all to work. So there's a satellite that's flying around the Earth at 7.4 kilometers per second. So it's going around the Earth every 90 minutes. It is just going meltingly fast. But at the same time, it is taking like centimeter resolution pictures of like whoever's back, like, so you could go look at your backyard on Google Earth. That's amazing to me. Space has just yielded so many of these technologies nowadays that we just take for granted. And in the classes I've taken so far, and in the classes I get to take in the future, I think that the significance of that has just been impressed upon me to a point where I don't think I'll ever forget. Like I will never think that space is just this mundane thing that we can just take advantage of. It is far from that. It is very far from that. So that's what I would say. If Seaman Timmy has enough time to listen to that spiel before his eyes glaze over and he wants to go get in the mess line, then that's great. But that's what I would try to say to him. So yeah.
So beyond learning some of the more abstract ideas of space, orbital mechanics, those kind of things, I'm going to kind of throw another scenario at you and see kind of how you think the MPS education you're getting here is going to help you become a better warfighter in the fleet. So you go to your next ship, DDG, whatever. Let's say you go back to Pearl Harbor. Oh, why not, right?
I'd love to. Great scuba diving there.
You show up a couple months later, the Chinese decide they're going over the Taiwan Strait, and you get called out to go and provide assistance. And what do you think the valuable lessons that you learned in your space mechanics program can help you provide the United States Navy in a warfighting environment?
Oh yeah, for sure. So let me just unpack that question real quick. So like you said, when push comes to shove, a SWO standing on the bridge. Sorry, I sat on the bridge of my first ship because they had really awesome chairs, but you have to stand on every single other ship I've ever been to. It's a shame. But a SWO standing on the bridge of a destroyer, LHD, cruiser, LCS, minesweeper, what have you, what can they benefit from by having this space knowledge? So big thing, they need to understand that the satellite communications and the information relays that they rely on are not always going to be there. And that's like takeaway number one, honestly, because I have learned about how capable and awesome all this satellite communications, all this space technology is. The second biggest thing I've learned is how fragile and susceptible it is, not like obviously to adversarial actions, but to rain, to foliage, to temperature, to humidity, to all these different things. And while you don't need to know, as a watchstander, you don't need to know, it's raining, I judge this to be slightly heavy rain, therefore this signal will attenuate by this many decibels. No, I'm not saying you need to know that as a warfighter. As a warfighter, you do need to know that, hey, I'm trying to reach so-and-so over the horizon, but they are this far away, it is raining where they are, and there's an island in the way with a forest on it. So you got to do them. You don't have to do the exact math, but you need to know that, hey, I shouldn't rely solely on this signal. And I think what warfighters should take away is that, hey, space is not the end-all be-all when it comes to satellite communications and data relaying, but it is very, very significant and very important that one knows how that part of the puzzle works. Because oftentimes, I mean, on SWO, on qualification boards for your surface warfare pin, comms questions are always, or I won't say always, but they are usually the bane of a lot of unqualified ensigns trying to get their SWO pin. I say that because it was the bane. Like, I wish I had taken this course before I had gone to get my SWO pin, and I'll just say that. And someone, if you can't communicate, you can't fight effectively, and that's rule number one. I mean, without sounding too lofty, I mean that's rule number one of war fighting. Like, you have to be able to communicate. So that's. I hope I answered that question.
No, yeah, no, I think it makes sense. It's,
roundabout way.
I think it's become kind of a very apparent to the DoD community as a whole that, I mean, space is great, but it's not always going to be there, which is, in some ways we need to understand the way that our terrestrial systems work, whether that's, an HF radio that maybe, God forbid, you have to use, or whatever else you might have on the ship to use to communicate. But you also have an understanding of what capabilities you do have at your disposal. So maybe, one type of SATCOM goes down, but you still have linked data flowing through, and how those kind of different things, or how those different things get affected. Is that something that might go through the space program or the space systems program? For sure. Another thing I just wanted to impress upon, like, a lot of times surface warfare, I'm only going to speak for the surface warfare community because I'm a part of it. I'd rather not make claims for the submariners or the pilots, but a lot of times when space and stuff like that comes up, I feel like the mentality is, oh, that's space, like that's for the smart people, that's for the Space Force, that's for the people with pocket protectors sitting in front of the NASA multi-screen layout. That's for them to worry about. I don't need to worry about space, and that's not true. And especially 2021 and follow on, space is going to become space is already a naval warfighting domain. And it's our responsibility as conscious surface warfare officers to know how to operate, integrate, and fight in that domain. Yeah, the same way you have to understand. You may not be a submariner, but you have to understand how undersea operations work. You're not a pilot, but you have to understand how things fly through the air.
Exactly.
The space just adds another domain, like you were saying.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. So now how many months do you have left here at MPS?
So I'm in my third semester now of a 7-semester program. So 4 times, 12, about a year left. Yeah.
And are you on a thesis track? How does that work?
So this is the semester I'm supposed to figure that out. I'm still doing some soul searching. I have a few ideas written down on a piece of paper on my refrigerator at home. But nothing concrete yet. So I'll maybe we can sit down and talk again when I figure out what I actually want to do. But yeah, this is soon. So soon I'll hopefully have some idea of what I want to do for a thesis. Yeah.
What would you like to see the direction of the podcast goes, or personally you as a host? Who would you like to interview, seek out?
Yeah. So really good question. So I really want this podcast to continue, because we've had a tremendous amount of freedom here at MPS, fortunately, and I really just want to maintain and preserve that freedom of creativity. I don't care how big or small it is. As long as the creative integrity of it gets preserved, that's fantastic. That is very, very, very valuable. As far as people I really want to talk to, so I've already gotten to talk to some pretty awesome folks. I really, really want to be able to sit down. So Jim Newman, Dr. Jim Newman, has already done a couple podcasts with Joe Novak. I really would like to get him back on because there are just so many. He has just had such an interesting story and so many cool, amazing experiences. If you don't know, he was an astronaut. And he works here now in the Space Systems academic group. And he just has tremendously interesting stories. Building the ISS, working with the Russians, just so cool. And I know him and Joe talked for quite a while, but there's still more in that guy's head that we can get out, and I think it'd be to our listeners' benefit to do that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Yeah, of course.
Kicking off my first podcast. So
yeah,
it was good.
Of course. Well, I really enjoyed it, and thanks again for letting me be the questionable flagship for your new Meet the Host series. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us in the Trident Room. For more information about today's guests and topics, please visit the show notes. The Trident Room has been brought to you by the Naval Postgraduate School Alumni Association and Foundation. For questions, comments, and suggestions, please email us at tridentroompodcasthost@nps.edu and find us online at nps.edu/Trident Room